It is a huge honor for me to be podcast interviewing Dr. Mark Hassad, BDSC, LDS. Is the LDS, is that a religion or a degree?
No, it's a qualification, licensed dental surgeon.
Well, I'm in Arizona, which is the state south of Utah, so probably 20% of all my homie dentists in Arizona are LDS. And your website is therelaxeddentist.com. I still haven't met a relaxed dentist. You might be the first one I've ever met. So your bio is you graduated from dental school in 1980, had high volume family oriented practice from 1986 to 2000, sold it, then set up high end adult only practice in 2001 and sold it in 2009 to retire. Got bored after 6 months and started doing locum work. Now, locum work, that's not really an American term. That's temp work in British?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, someone goes away for a holiday, you come along and fill in for them.
And that's called locum.
Yeah, that's what we call it in Australia. Yeah.
And Britain and the United Kingdom, most of their areas. But yeah, so temporary work, locum work. Notice how inefficiently dental practice was run and started consulting and lecturing. Have been lecturing on case acceptance since December 2014 and on efficiency started February this year. I am so honored to have you on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's Sunday morning here. It's a nice day. We're just relaxed. It's just, yeah, very good. So thank you for having me, Howard.
So it's 4:30 p.m. on Saturday here. And what time is it? It's Sunday morning at what time?
9:30 a.m.
And my brother moved to Sydney, and we were all born and raised in Kansas, and he took a temporary job in Sydney, Australia, and after like 1 hour said, I'm never coming home again. Now he's been there like 2 years. And every time I visit him, I've taken 2 of my 4 boys there a couple times, and the whole family's like, and why are we going back to the United States? It's like, wow.
Right.
But so what are your when you were going around temping and locum work in dental offices, and you saw that they weren't very efficient, what stuck out the most? What was the most common theme?
Well, absolutely. When I was looking at, I did some consulting too, as well as the temping. And when I was doing the consulting, I'd go in and I'd just sit in the corner and watch a dentist work. And sure, you could pick up all sorts of things in how he handled the instruments, how he handled the staff and the setups and all that, where he was making himself inefficient. But the main thing I noticed is dentists couldn't communicate. They just could not get their message across. They'd just sort of blather on, talk for 20 minutes, and then the patient would get confused and go out the door. So it was a huge issue, and nearly all the underperforming dentists I saw just had a huge problem with communication. That's why I started that as my first thing, even though efficiency was my main interest.
So the thing you saw that was the most inefficient was the dentist communicating to the patient.
Absolutely.
What about the
Absolutely.
dentist communicating to the staff?
I didn't notice that so much. I mean, that was my focus was on the dentist and the patient relationship. So that wasn't what I was consulting about.
Would you say in a nutshell that dentists sell until they lose a patient because they don't stop selling and start closing?
Yeah, well, I've got a friend who used to run car dealerships, and we've talked about sales and the process of getting people to buy the product you've got. And there's a fundamental difference between dentistry and between car sales. Like car sales, someone walks in the door, you either sell them or it's all over and you've lost them. So you've got one shot at it, and so you can lean on people, you can pressure them, you can make it hard for them. But the thing is, in a dental office, you're trying to build a long-term relationship. So if you tell someone about a crown, we could do a crown for you, Howard, do this and that. If we tell you about it and you don't accept it this time, I don't want to pressure you because I don't want to break the relationship, because the fact you've said no to a crown this time doesn't mean 6 months from now when you get another tooth that breaks, you're not going to say no again. So yeah, it's a fundamental difference. You've got to keep the pressure out of it's dentistry is selling without selling. That's what I say to people.
So what is your approach to case acceptance?
Well, I've got two two outstanding qualities with respect to case acceptance. One is I love efficiency, and the second is I'm not naturally gifted. I've got no gifts at all in that regard. Like, I can't read people, anything like that. So I really struggle. So I think that was a benefit, because I had to then work out a system that allowed me to get case acceptance. And if you look at what goes on in a dental office when a dentist is trying to get case acceptance, I can really break it down into 4 stages. The first stage is getting rapport. That's when the patient walks in the door. And you've got to greet them well, good eye contact, good visual sort of connection with them, be there, present, all that sort of thing. So that's the first thing. And the fact they've walked in your door means they already trust you a bit. Now, provided you just sort of do a few things that enhance that, you've really got the patient's trust. So that's the first stage, rapport. The second part of the process is you've got to really analyse what's going on with their teeth. So we've got to do all our dentist stuff, tap on the teeth, vitality test, perio probe, whatever we've got to do. So we've got to do all that stuff. But the thing a lot of dentists miss out on is, as you analyse what's going on with their mouth, you've also got to agitate the patient, because they've walked in the door and they think they've broken off both lingual cusps on a lower molar, and they've walked in the door thinking, oh, well, I'll be in there, it'll cost me $80 for a filling, it'll be fixed up for the next 20 years, and you've got to let them know, no, this is serious. Like, you've really got issues with this tooth. If we're going to fix it, it's going to take some investment and some time, and you're going to have to spend some money on it. So that's the second thing. You've got to agitate them as you're analysing. And then the third thing, which a lot of dentists miss out on, is you've got to think. You've got to get everything absolutely straight in your own head. Because one thing I noticed, so many dentists would start presenting a case, and they'd be a little bit confused in their mind. They'd be sort of, will we do a root filling, won't we? Will we need a core, won't we? And they'd sort of get all this confusion going on in their head. And if you start speaking when you've got 5% confusion in your own mind, by the time it gets out of your mouth, it's 95% confusion. So you've got to get things really straight in your mind. And then the fourth step is just explain. So if you've done the first 3 steps, you've got the trust, you've analysed, you've got the patient concerned about their condition, you've thought about it, got it straight in your head, well, then explaining what's going on to them is dead simple. And I could tell you, like, people think that to sell dentistry or to present dentistry successfully, it takes a long while. If you've done those first 3 steps, you can present a full mouth case in 90 seconds and get acceptance. And a friend of mine who I showed this to, he went back to his practice and he actually tried it. And he contacted me, he said, I just presented and got acceptance on a $60,000 case. And then his next comment was, shutting up hurts so bad, which I thought was a fantastic comment. Sometimes less is more. We just have to shut up.
So that was a lot of information. So succinctly go through the 4 steps again, just so they can hold them in their head.
First step is rapport. That's basically getting the patient's trust. So it's how you greet them, being standing. I've been in a dental office sitting there as the observer. A dentist has been typing on the keyboard of a computer as the patient has entered the room, and the dentist has sort of, without even looking up from the keyboard, has waved his hand and said, just have a seat, I'll be with you in a minute. Like, you've already lost about 10 trust points right there. So it's greeting them well, but then equally not being too friendly. I mean, you're their dentist, you're not their new bestie. That's the other thing. I mean, I used to have a bakery I'd go to, and every time I walked in there to buy bread, it was like I was their new bestie, and I had to tell them all about my family. And in the end, I went somewhere else because I just couldn't stand it. So it's you've got to be sort of professional, warm, friendly, present, but don't overdo it. And the other thing is too with trust is so often dentists try and communicate with patients when they're lying flat on their back. We'll try and convey an image. But the problem is laying someone flat on their back, as we do, it converts them to passive. So we become active, they become passive, they're lying flat on their back. If you communicate, they've got to be sitting up, eye to eye, knee to knee. So very important. Another thing that too with getting rapport with people, getting the trust, is to try and keep judgment out at this stage. Like, patients will walk in and say ridiculous things. I want all my teeth pulled out. And we're often so quick to judge. But at this stage, you're just getting someone's trust. So you just, okay, So tell me a bit more about that. Why do you say you want to have your teeth out? What's going on? And so you stay in the conversation rather than closing it down with, well, no, that's a terrible idea. You're going to hate it. You wouldn't like dentures. They're wrong. All this sort of stuff. So the trust thing is very important right at the start. That's stage one, rapport.
Is that stage one? Do you think it's ideal in the operatory, or some dentists, when they meet a new patient for the first time, have them in a treatment plan room, or a different room?
It's interesting. Like in my office, I had a consultation room, and when we go to talk about the dentistry at the end, we'd get out of the dental environment, go to the consultation room. And I tried meeting patients in the consultation room and meeting them in the operatory, and I didn't find it made any difference. So I just took over to meeting them in the operatory. I mean, they're there to expect dentistry, and it always seemed a bit artificial to me. We're meeting them in another room, and then we talk for a little while, and then we take them into the next. So, yeah, for me, it worked perfectly well meeting them in the operatory.
And it is a fine line. You want to be their friend. I mean, you want to be their, a professional relationship, but you don't want to get too close. That's the reason I have fired every housemaid I've ever had in the last decade, because they get to the point where they just want to come in and have coffee and sit and talk to you and this and that. And it's like, I'm paying you to clean the house. I don't want to, spend 20 minutes catching up every time you come to my house. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you run a risk of alienating people. A while ago, I had an eye test, and also I went to an ophthalmologist as well. Now, when I went for the eye test at the optometrist, she just wanted to be my new best friend. And what do you do? And what's your family? And what a dog, And we're sitting there like for 20 minutes with the, I assume the meter was running. We're sitting there for 20 minutes talking about my family, and I'm like, if I want to talk about my family, I'll go down to the pub and, chat with my mates. I don't need this, just test my eyes, And then the opposite was, I went to the ophthalmologist, and he was, personable, looked me straight in the eye, shook my hand, was very involved in the situation. But okay, Mark, tell me, what can I do for you today? And it was very busy, and I thought, wow, this is what I want. This is it. This guy's just going to get on with it. Like, yes. I felt like I was home.
Yeah, and I use a real common separator, like in staff meetings, everything. Everybody gets in, they're all talking, they're all playing, and then so what I do is I clap my hands and say, okay, let's go to work. And then you start with an agenda thing. And I think that clap thing makes them realize, okay, we're switching from how's the weekend, how's the dog, how's the cat, how's the car, how's every damn thing. Let's go to work. And
yeah.
So number one was trust rapport.
Yeah, that's right.
Number two?
That's number two is analyze. And you've got to analyze. We've got to do our dentist stuff, all the vitality tests, the tapping on, all that sort of stuff, frac finder, and all the things we do. So that's analyze. But the thing, a lot of dentists, they just sort of go on and do all their tests, but they're not informing the patient as they go. They're not sort of letting the patient know what's happening. So you've got to analyse, but also you've got to agitate the patient, because the patient always thinks the problem they've got is minor and not, like somebody comes in with rebound pain on a cusp of a tooth. We know that's a serious problem. We know that the cusp might split off. We know that the tooth could even split. So as dentists, we know that's a serious problem. The patient's just coming in thinking, well, that's a little minor little issue. That's nothing. 5 minutes, I'll be here, $50, it'll be all fixed. So you've got to, as you're analysing the thing, so there's a few techniques you can use for that. I mean, one of my absolute favourites, I call it the magic trio, and it works so well. I'm in a practice showing this to a dentist in Queensland, Australia, and he was, how do I get patients to understand the seriousness of the problem? Now, fortunately, there happened to be a dental supply rep, a Henry Schein rep in the practice at the time. So we called the rep in and we said, can you be a pretend patient? I'm not going to examine your teeth. I won't examine them, but I just want you to lie back and be a pretend patient. So she said, fine. So we laid the chair back. I put on the loops, the mask, the gloves, the whole thing. And then I just pulled aside the corner of mouth and I go, oh, you hear that? Just a little intake of breath. Like that. And I look at the first lower right first molar. Oh, that's not good. You've got a crack in that tooth all the way front to back. And she nearly levitated out of the chair. Like she was just, oh my goodness, what? And I said, hold on, you didn't hear me at the start. I said, I'm not really examining your teeth. I'm just making stuff up. But, those three little things that, that's not good. What I'm seeing is a crack in that tooth. See, so often as dentists, we don't want to alarm patients. We don't want to worry them. So we keep all that stuff to ourselves because we know it isn't good if there is a crack all the way front to back. So at the end of it, we did a few other things. At the end of it, the chair leant up again and she turns and she looks me in the eye and she says, so tell me, my tooth really isn't cracked? And I said, you didn't hear me. I didn't even look. It was just an exercise. But I mean, that's how powerful the impact can be. I had it for the first time in absolute ages. I had a lady, after I'd done an exam of her teeth, she was actually crying. And I said, because I always address the obvious issue. So she's crying and I said, tell me, why are you crying? And she said, for the first time in my life, I understand what's going on with my teeth. And I thought, how wonderful is that? She's been going to the dentist for 30 or 40 years. And for the first time in her life, she understands why everything's falling apart in her mouth. I mean, that's what you want to do with the patients. That's the sort of impact you want to have.
So you said it was a magic trio. So what were the three parts of the trio?
Sharp intake of breath. But I mean, I'm doing it a bit louder than I would in real life because in real life, you're up next to their ear. So you just do it very softly. And then that's not good. And then what I'm seeing there is, and then you describe whatever you're seeing, a crack all the way front to back in that tooth. What I'm seeing there is pus coming out of the gum beside your first molar tooth.
Nice, nice, nice. So then, so then what would be number three again?
The third thing is you've got to think. And this is the thing a lot of dentists don't do before they start talking and explaining stuff to patients. They don't get it all straight in their mind. And you've got to get four things straight. You've got to get the diagnosis. So you've got to know the diagnosis. Because, I mean, really, whatever treatment you're about to suggest or recommend is based on the diagnosis. And if you haven't got that right, well, you can be all over the shop. So you've got to get the diagnosis. So at this stage, if you can't work out the diagnosis, go back, do some more tests, do whatever you've got to do. But you've really got to, get that worked out. The next thing is you need to work out what are two options for treatment of that diagnosis. You need two options because two options are easy to decide. If I say to you, Howard, which one do you want, the red one or the blue one? You can make that choice, right? But if I say, which one do you want, Howard? The red, the green, the orange, the blue, or the purple, I'm going to get at the end of the presentation, I'm going to get, well, gee, I don't know, I can't figure that out. I'll just go home and think about it. Can you give me some written quote? All that sort of stuff. So you've got to get two options for the treatment. And the two options are this. The first option is what is ideal treatment. So that's what you'd do for your best friend if money were no object. So you've got your best friend in the world sitting in that chair, what you would do for, and they're wealthy, what you would do for that person. And then the second option is a reasonable compromise, something you can do that won't embarrass you later on. So that's the two options you get worked out. Then you need to work out the fee for those things so that you know clearly in your own head the fee. And then finally, any warnings that you're going to issue with that. Like sometimes, not all root fillings work. Where success rates are between 90 and 95%. But if you want to warn the patient about that prior to commencement of treatment, you've got to know that you're going to do that at this stage. So it's diagnosis, two options, fee, and warnings. And once you've got those four things straight in your head, you're good to go.
So the number four is where you say a case presentation in 90 seconds or less.
Yeah, exactly.
So would you say number four is just the close, or what would number four be?
Yeah, well, at this stage, you've got the patient's trust. They know that what's going on in their mouth. They know the seriousness of it. You know exactly what you're going to say to them. So it's really simple. And even then, I often think the problem with a lot of dentists is when they come into the room, they're winging it with the patient. They are just sort of making it up as they go along. And the thing is, dentistry, the title, The Relaxed Dentist, dentistry is a high-stress environment. It can fry your brain. You go in there and you're trying to get out a wisdom tooth and you're not sure if you're meant to be doing this. Oh, yeah, I'll give it a go, all right. And then you snap off the distal root and then you're digging, and how close are we to the nerve and all this sort of stuff. And then the staff are standing by the door tapping their watches saying, how much longer, Dr. Farran? All that sort of stuff. That can fry your brain. So you need to have a checklist when you're communicating with patients so that then when you walk into the room with the next patient, you don't blow it.
That was just a totally wrong example for me though, because that is my number one thrill. I can pull all 4 wisdom teeth, no matter what they look like, in under 10 minutes, and 90% of the time it's under 5. I just love surgery. Now, if you were saying trying to dig out a broken file or whatever, yeah, I understand. I want to go back up the trail a little bit. Back to when we were analyzing. Do you think some ways of analyzing help with case acceptance, like say instead of the doctor just looking in the mouth but going over it with an intraoral camera and picking out photos, or instead of taking film x-rays that are 1 inch by 1 inch on a light view box that's constricting your retinas, to blow it up with digital x-rays so they see an 8 by 10? Another one might be, instead of the hook, trying to get a stick, using a diagonodent that has quantifiable numbers and noise. Do you think any of those, or case presentation? There's Casey is a big one. These case presentation softwares. What's that app on iTunes? There's an app for your smartphone. Is it GPS Doc or GPS? But anyway, talk about any of those things.
Well, I agree. Diagonodent's a great bit of technology, and I like it. And I love the fact it makes that sound. It sort of makes the the high pitched one that goes when so I think that's a great thing. And then you explain to the patient before you start. Well, 0 to 5 is fine, 5 to 10, whatever the numbers are, over 15, and then when it goes bloop, you go, oh my goodness, that's 27. That's fantastic. So I love that one. The first thing, though, is that dentists, they do need to really examine carefully. Like, so often I see they do a cursory sort of examination, because often we know what the problem is instantly. Like someone says, every time I have a cup of coffee, it kills me. I have a cold drink, it goes away, right? We know that's a, non-vital tooth, right? Instantly we know that. But we've got to maintain the suspense. Like, we've got to go through the steps. We've got to really, examine the patient. Let's have a look. Oh, goodness me, and talk about the things. So that's the first thing. You've got to examine really, really carefully. I didn't use an intraoral camera. I took big, full mouth photos, but I didn't use the one that took the little, tiny photos. And the reason is, I don't think patients can interpret them. We look at an ultra close-up photo of the lower first molar, and we know exactly what it is. We know which cusps are which and all this sort of stuff. They look at it, and I'm not sure they don't recognise it from a piece of chewing gum off the bottom of their shoe. Like, they really do not recognise that. So I used to just use the nurse. And it's interesting. Through all my sort of temp work, I found the nurses love to look in the patient's mouth. They're dental nurses, but they never get invited to look at stuff. And so what I'd do is goodness, that's not good. There's a crack all the way front to back in your lower first molar. Then I'd say, Nurse, Melissa, have a look at this. Can you see that crack there? And I'd get the light right on it. Melissa, see that there? And she'd say something like, oh my goodness, there is a crack. And I'd go, yes. And imagine the patient lying there and hearing Melissa say, oh my goodness, there is a crack. It's just, you've achieved more than you would have achieved with an intraoral camera in 10 seconds. An intraoral camera, they're looking at it trying to figure out what it is. Now, the other thing you said about showing people x-rays, that is one of my absolute hates. First off, it's a waste of time. The thing is, patients can't interpret it. I used to sit there and I'd show them the x-rays. I'd be going through and pointing out this and that and the other thing. And you know what? After 5 minutes of this, they'll say, what are the white things? They've got absolutely nothing of what you've said to them over the previous 10 minutes. So I just think it's a total furphy to think that patients can read x-rays. I mean, even some dentists can't read x-rays. On a dental chat line I'm involved with the other day, someone put out a dental x-ray, and it had a pretty ordinary root filling in it. And the dentist was wondering, what would people say? Would you redo the root filling before you did a crown, or would you just trust that ordinary looking root filling? And she said, in her comment, she said, no periapical pathology is noted. Well, I looked at it and there was an area on that tooth about as big as my thumbnail, right? And I thought to myself, isn't that amazing? Like, if a dentist who's had 5 years of training and looked at tens of thousands of x-rays can't see obvious periapical pathology, what hope do patients have? So it's just, I mean, the best way though, if I do want, patients wanting, I'm trying to convince them of something, I will sometimes look at the x-ray, and you look at it very intensely where they can see you're looking at it, and you flex your masseter muscle and you furrow your brow, and then you turn to them and you say, you know what, Howard, that tooth is infected. And you've saved yourself the 10 minutes that you would have spent trying to explain an x-ray to them.
I think one disaster is the FMX. I think that there's 15, 16, 18 views. I mean, the patient has no idea what they're looking at. I used to love I thought the Pano was 100 times better than the FMX. In fact, when these young dentists tell me that the CBCT cone beam was the greatest invention in radiology, I laugh. I say, no, it wasn't. It was whoever figured out how to put a R on one side and an L on the other of the Pano, so that every damn patient look at that and say, is that there? So that's the right side? I mean, that was just, that R and L thing was the greatest invention in radiography. What would you say are fatal mistakes that dentists do?
Well, you're talking about in the rapport or the analyze stage, or, well, I mean, in the analyze stage, the things I think about are the assumptions we make. Like, dentists make all sorts of assumptions about what patients can afford and what they want without giving them a chance to actually make the decision themselves. Give you an example. I was in a practice in Sydney, so where your brother lives. I'm in a practice there, and Sydney, real estate prices are like sky high. The real estate there's expensive. So I knew everywhere around me there's $1 million, $2 million, $3 million homes. So you assume the people who are in this practice have money. But anyway, the patient walked in and you looked at their history, and it was just broken tooth patch, broken tooth patch, broken tooth patch, all the way down their history. And what do you know? They've broken a tooth again. And the dentist looks at it, goes, oh, well, and they'd read the history and all this sort of stuff. He says, oh, okay, we'll need to get you back for another big filling in that tooth. We'll put a couple of pins in and we'll try and hold it together. So we'll make the time. And normally when I'm sort of in there watching dentists work, I don't say anything, like I just shut up. But I just couldn't help myself this day. So as the patient stood up to leave, I just looked the patient in the eye and I said, I can't remember the patient's name now, but I said, tell me, John, what do you want for your teeth? So that's 7 words. John, what do you want for your teeth? And John looks me straight back in the eye and he says, I want them fixed so they don't keep breaking all the time. And I go, man, oh man, like, why did the dentist not ask this question? So John says that to me, and I go, well, okay, John, there are these things, they're called crowns. And what they are, they're just covers over the top of the teeth that hold them together and make them strong. Now, the drawback with crowns is they're more expensive. The type of crowns you need there are $1,600 each. And I was looking over, I'll call the dentist, Bill. I was looking over Bill's shoulder as he was working, and I think you need 6 of them. So the patient can work that out, $1,600 each times 6, that's 10 grand. And the patient goes, fine, when do we start? So in that 1 minute, just from asking that one question, but that dentist, because they'd fallen into this assumption, the patient always having patchwork on their teeth, they hadn't offered them the alternative. So that's the biggest mistake, making assumptions about what patients value and what they can afford without giving them the chance to decide themselves.
So right now, an Aussie dollar is what, 74 cents to the U.S.? So
something like that.
So you have a very strong dollar right now, don't you?
we were above parity a while ago, but now we've dropped down again. And then, a few years ago, we were down to 50 cents. So it was real expensive to go to the US then.
So talk about the dentist talking money. When you listen to dentists talk and you go to lectures and everything, some people are just, a doctor can't talk money. Other one, doctor has to talk money. You see really smart people on both extremes. What's your view on a doctor talking about money?
Well, I think that patients judge whether your fee is fair by your level of comfort when you present it. If you sit there and look them straight in the eye and you're sincere and you mean what you say and you're not fidgeting and your voice isn't becoming all high and squeaky and you're really worried, or if you just look them straight in the eye and say, Howard, to go through and completely restore your mouth, it will cost you $36,500. If they see your comfort and you're relaxed and you sincerely and you really mean it, that'll carry the day. And patients don't even think twice about it. It's really the dentist putting their own discomfort about talking money onto the patients. I mean, patients have got no great hang up about money. They don't care who quotes the fee. So we get so worried about it. We've just got to have that belief in our fee, belief that a fee's fair, and be like so many dentists. They wouldn't be good poker players. When it comes to presenting the fee, their fingers start going like this. They're sort of fidgeting, and then the voice goes up and the tempo goes up and the whole bit, and then they present it like they're really nervous and they look away. I mean, I know myself because I'm sort of an introvert, right? That's my basic personality style. And years ago, when I first started in practice, our crowns were $650, right? $650. And so I'd tell a patient about a crown they need, and they'd say, "Oh, how much is that?" Because I hadn't mentioned the fee. So they'd say, "How much is that?" And I'd go, $490, right? And I'd be sitting there and I'd be kicking myself. Why did I just discount $160 off the fee? Well, I did it because I was nervous and whatever. But the patient would read my body language and go, "Oh, this guy must be overcharging," even though I was giving them the rock bottom price. Whereas, after practicing for a few years, I just look them straight in the eye and go, "Howard, the type of crown you need there is $650." And the patients go, "Fine." If it's nothing to you, it's nothing to they understood it. And I always say to dentists when they're worried about presenting the fee, it only hurts the first 200 times.
I think the thing that I hear the most negativity about from patients is that they feel the last dentist said an implant was going to be $1,000. And
Yep.
then when it was all done, it turned out to be $1,000 for an implant, then $250 for a bone grafting, and then more for this and more for that, and they went in there, and I said, well, if you walked into a grocery store and grabbed a gallon of milk and you thought it was $3, and by the time you got to the cash register it was $5, that would be insanity.
Yeah.
But that's what happens every single day in complex dentistry. The dentists. They say, well, I didn't know I was going to have to bone graft. Well, I didn't know. And then I see the sharpest ones having a padded fee, so sometimes they're not going to have to bone graft, sometimes they will. But talk about those issues.
Well, a while ago I was in a practice again in Queensland, Australia, and I was sort of watching the dentist. Then the patient went out to the front desk, and all of a sudden I hear all this shouting and screaming coming from the front desk, like the patient is really going off. So I stick my head around the corner to find out what it was, and it turned out the patient had just been in for a crown. The dentist had quoted him $1,800. Then the patient had walked to the front desk and it was $2,050. Now, why? The reason was the dentist got into it, found he needed to do a core and charged the patient an extra $250. And I think the patient was perfectly justified in going off, because he'd just 1 hour earlier he'd been told 18 and now it's $2,000. So I say to people, when you quote the fee, throw everything in. If you think there might be a root filling, throw that in. If you think there might be a core, throw that in. Like whatever you think it might be. Because at the end, if it turns out to be a lot simpler than you thought, well, option one is you can keep the money, but option two is, and this works great, you look the patient in the eye and you say, Howard, things worked out simpler than I thought it was. Your crown, instead of being $2,050, is only $1,800. And the patient is like, wow, thank you so much. That is fantastic. And they go out there sort of singing your praises in the community instead of bagging you. So I always think, quote the maximum it can possibly be and back it down from there. I mean, with an extraction, if someone says, how much is this extraction? Well, I know you're a wizard and it's only going to come out in 5 minutes. But, you know, us mere mortals, sometimes we break roots and we got to dig and all this sort of stuff. And so I always quote for a big surgical extraction. And then I say, well, I'm quoting you the worst can possibly, it may be $450 if we really have trouble getting it out. I'm hoping we'll get it out for $180, but it could be $450. Is that okay? And I think that's a much, much better way of going with your fees. Always quote
and
high,
I think the young dentist has to stick their tongue in this light socket 100 times, and that is they see a deep cavity and then they quote a big filling, and then they get in there and it turns into be endo. So you tell someone it's going to be $250, and within 20 minutes now it's going to be $2,500 root canal billet and crown, and they're all mad and upset, and it's crazy. Yet you sit there, and if I listen to my intuition, if I even think there's a chance that this is going to be into the nerve or whatever, I quote the root canal billet and crown, and they're all prepared for that. And then when you're all done, you set them up and say, I'm so sorry. The X-ray is a two-dimensional view of a three-dimensional object. I knew this was going to be a root canal. When I got in there, I wasn't. So now it was only a filling. And then you're their hero. Because satisfaction equals perception of what's happening minus what I expected. So the only way you get to a positive number is you have to, lower their expectations and then beat them. And if you lower everyone's expectations and then beat them, they love you. And if you raise their expectations that you're going to be a hero and then it doesn't happen, then it's an exact nightmare.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the first bosses I had, I worked in London for a while, and
really,
London was good. But the thing with this boss was he was fantastic with full dentures. He would say to a patient, I couldn't believe it the first time I heard him say it. He would say to a patient, if you can even keep these dentures in your mouth, I will be amazed. And the patient would come back 2 weeks later and he'd say, I can keep them in my mouth. And they'd have trouble talking and the dentures would be dropping. And the dentist would go, that is fantastic. That is incredible. I never expected a result that good, and because it got their expectations so low right at the start that anything beyond that was a great success. So yeah, I agree with you completely, Howard. It's just we've got to lower expectations, over deliver, and there's this sort of thing. I think the last thought you leave a patient with is so vital. If you leave them going out of the room happy and with a positive thought, it's such a practice builder. But I mean, that guy who underquoted on the crown, that patient is going to never be back. He's going to be telling everyone in the small community, and that dentist robs you. It's just a disaster. Whereas if he'd reversed it, he could have been, well, if he didn't need the core, he would have been a hero, and the patient would have been telling everyone how he did it so much better for him. So yeah.
So
right.
This is June 4th. June 17th, I lecture in London, and then June 24th, Glasgow. So how did you end up in London? So you graduated in dental school in Australia?
Yeah, that's right.
And then that license, does it reciprocate with the United Kingdom?
It used to. It doesn't anymore. So, but anyway, a lot of Aussie dentists went over to London, and a great place to spend a few years.
How old were you when you graduated? How many years did you practice over there?
23 when I graduated. So I worked for a couple of years in Australia. Then I went off to London for a year, and then came back and set up my own practice. So that was that
in
first
Melbourne.
Practice you mentioned. Yeah, that's right.
Now, have you traveled the States a lot?
Yeah, been to Phoenix.
What city do you think reminds you the most of Melbourne in the United States?
Well, the city where I felt really, really comfortable was San Francisco.
San Fran remind you of Melbourne or Sydney?
Well, I mean, it's steeper than Melbourne. The hills are a lot steeper. But the thing I like about it, it's got just a nice feel with some old buildings. You can walk around that city. That's the great thing with it. I mean, so many of the US cities are not walkable. You've just got to have a car or you're dead. Whereas San Fran, you can sort of walk, and they've got public transport and the cable cars and all that sort of stuff.
My
So that's
brother's
great.
been there 2 years and he still hasn't bought a car.
In Sydney,
There's
yeah,
just no need for a car.
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
it.
that is just so amazing. I like all those Scandinavian countries too. I would love to live in Sydney, you know, Copenhagen, you know, Denmark, all those cities where you don't need a car are so cool. You mentioned earlier that it was a mistake that you were afraid of committing, stating the fee of 650, so you said 490 or whatever. In my 30 years of dentistry, America switched from everybody using indemnity insurance where they submitted their fee and the insurance paid a percent, and
Right.
now it's completely turned around where now the insurance gives you the fee and it's like 40% lower, and 82% of dentists signed up for that. What are your thoughts on discounting?
Discounting is my absolute. Yeah, I just hate discounting. I mean, I guess if you're in a market where the health funds have got it so sewn up that in order to be in practice, you need to accept what fee they offer. Well, I guess that's the market you're in. But the thing that I see is dentists in a market where it may even be soft, like they may have an excess. Well, it's an easy market in that they've got an excess of patients, and still they discount. I was in a practice recently where they had patients really coming out their ears. They had so many they didn't know what to do with it, and yet they had this idea about an hourly rate. So if you happen to work efficiently, like you taking out 4 wisdom teeth in 5 minutes, if you did that, all they'd do is they would massively discount the fees back to what they thought was a reasonable hourly rate. So you might get $30 per wisdom tooth for doing that, which is terrible. So I think the thing with discounting, the first thing you got to do is look at your fees and decide, are they fair? And so many dentists, I think, do undercharge because they don't allow for a depreciation and replacement of equipment. I mean, you see old dentists, and a lot of them are sitting in offices using equipment that's held together with duct tape and wire, because they can't afford to replace it. And why can't they afford to replace it? They can't afford to replace it because they've undercharged for years and years. The other thing is that a lot of offices I see are massively understaffed. They just don't have enough staff there to keep the work flowing the way it should. So, I mean, I just think you've got to work out what the fair fee is and stick to it.
And when you talk about stress, because the name of your website is therelaxeddentist.com. When you talk about therelaxeddentist.com, you're trying to relax a dentist who's stressed out of his or her mind.
Yep.
Talk about stress, and why did you go with the name of the website therelaxeddentist.com?
Well, I think stress is probably the number one issue, and I mean, not to labour it, but I mean, we've all probably had friends and colleagues who've, snuffed themselves for that sort of
Routinely.
routinely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
About
it's
three. I know about 3 a year.
it's a huge issue.
3 a year.
And
That's amazing.
3 a year, yeah, out of your personal,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, it's absolutely it's a shocker. And I walked into a practice. This was in rural Victoria, a while, the state I live in, and the dentist. I was just sitting there in the reception area, just sort of chatting with the front desk person, and within a 1 hour period, that dentist walked out into the hallway twice and said, "I need some help in here. I need some help in here." Waving his arms like this, because the staff were all off having a chat with each other in the stereo area, right, and ignoring him. And you could see from this guy the way he was calling out and his body language and the look in his eyes, this guy was stressed up to the maximum, absolutely was. And I think it's incumbent on us to organise our practices and our lives to reduce that stress. So we've got to equip the office the right way. We've got to get the right materials and equipment. And so many dentists won't spend money on equipment. Like they'll have the carbon fibre golf clubs and the Porsche, and then they'll be using a 1980s curing light that takes 30 seconds to set the composite. Ridiculous stuff. So we've got to get the equipment right. Then we've got to get the staff levels right. And so many staff are under, we just don't have enough of them. Then you've got to get the systems right. And the systems is really crucial because I think, and there's a lot of psychological research to back it up, that you can only make so many decisions per day, and then your brain gets tired. I mean, there was a great article I saw, and they actually quoted your president, Obama. And in this article, he said, I don't want to decide what suit I wear, what tie I wear, or what I eat for breakfast because I've got enough other decisions to make during the day. And it's like that in a dental office. Like, so much of it is done on an ad hoc basis because they haven't got good systems. And to get back to the communication thing, if you've got that sort of step-by-step approach and a checklist for everything you do, you're not burning up your mental capacity making those decisions. Because you really, when you want to burn up your mental capacity, is when you're trying to work out, where am I going to place this implant, or what length of implant, or what diameter will I use, all those sort of things. I mean, that's stuff that you really need to think about. You don't need to think about, hey, can I get someone in here to help me, that sort of thing. So the analogy I use in a dental office is that it works best when everybody has a role, knows what that role is, and sticks to that role. And the Formula One racing team is the best example of that I can think of. And the dentist's role is to sit in the car and drive it around the track as fast as he possibly can. But so many dental offices I go into, the dentist is out there changing the wheels and filling up the gas tank. Just the wrong thing. You've just got to... I mean, I think really the dentist does dentistry, nothing else. That's it. And the team around him take care of everything else. And I noticed that when I was going around doing these temp jobs, some practices I'd go into, I would walk in the door, I wouldn't know the patients wouldn't know them at all, and I'd be producing $6,000 to $8,000 a day. And at the end of the day, I'd be fresh and relaxed and, what's for dinner, And other places, I'd go in there and I'd produce $1,800 for the day. And at the end of the day, I just wanted to go and lie down and put a wet cloth over my face, like it was just, I was exhausted. And it was all how it was set up with the systems and the staff. In the really good practices, the staff watched the dentist like a hawk. And they're just constantly watching the dentist, making sure the dentist has the next thing in front of them. And then the really bad practices, one I went into in another state, a patient came in with a toothache. Now, with a toothache, what's it going to be? It's going to be extraction, endo start, maybe a filling, maybe some antibiotics. But it came in with a toothache, and it turned out it was going to be an endo start. So I said, let's start the endo. 16 minutes setup time. So I'm just sitting there spinning my wheels for 16 minutes while the nurse reaches into drawers and gets stuff out. It's just incredible.
I love the word locum better than temp. But I love nurse instead of dental assistant. I wish we called them dental nurses because it just makes so much more sense to the dentist. When we were talking about discounting, you were saying, it depends on if the market is soft or there's a lot of it, whatever. But in our 3 decades of practicing, and you specifically were in London, I mean, when we got out of school, probably 95% of the UK dentists were involved with NHS. And now probably, 5,000 of them said enough's enough and branched on their own. Can you can you discuss what dental insurance is like, how that's a factor in Australia and in the United Kingdom and the differences there? You're talking to about 83% of your audience is U.S., and so they probably don't ever get to hear what dental insurance is like in Australia or in the United Kingdom.
Well, my experience in the UK goes back to about 86, so it's probably not really current, but back then we had the National Health. And I can't remember, we got paid something like £20 for doing a crown and like maybe £5 for doing an endo. And it was just amazing. So guys back then would do this motorised endo that the first day in the practice, I actually, before I started working in this practice, I went along and I said to the boss, I don't know what the standard of care, what you guys do. Can I just watch? So I went for 2 days and just sat there in the corner and watched the boss of the practice work. And some of the stuff I saw would just make just be horrified
at it. Is that why in movies and literature, British people are always teased about having bad teeth? I mean, it really is. You see it in the cartoons. Have you heard of the cartoon Family Guy by Seth MacFarlane?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the British guy has, the worst teeth of all the cartoons. Yeah, it's very common. Do you think that was because the reimbursement rate from the NHS throughout the 70s and the 80s and the 90s did not allow really for
Yeah,
optimal dentistry?
yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think that when they first set up the NHS, they I'm told they set a reasonable fee level, and then they found dentists were just making too much money, so they just kept turning down the fees and turning down the fees. So if you've got, I mean, who knows what £5 is today in today's money? But imagine if someone said to you, Howard, I'd like you to do this endo in a lower premolar, and here's $40. Well, what can I mean? $40 would hardly even buy the materials,
Well,
would
it,
it?
it causes game theory. So when I go to places that have insurance, like if there's no money in the root canal and the crown, but there's a lot of money in the implant, or if they set the fee for the root canal and you can't make money, but they don't set the fee for the implant, then out the teeth go flying out of their mouth. I mean, it's
Yeah.
game theory. I mean, tell me, are we playing checkers or chess? It's the same board, and it's the same number of squares, but it's just different rules. And so what's insurance like in Australia?
Well, we've got two levels of it. I mean, a lot of patients will have insurance, but they want to choose their dentist, so they'll go to whoever they've traditionally gone to, and dental insurance will reimburse between 30 to 40% of the cost. Sometimes a bit higher on examinations
But
and
do they? But
cleans.
do they? But do they determine your total fee? I mean, they say the insurance. You just said it'll pay like 30, 40%. But do they say you have to charge 800 and not 801 or 850 or 900?
So if you've chosen to stay out of their preferred provider network, if you've chosen to stay out of that network, you charge exactly what you want, and then the fund will reimburse a standard fee. But then a lot of dentists choose, well, let's go into the preferred provider network, because what happens then is the fund will just fill your practice with patients, but then you have to do it at their predetermined fee. And I mean, typically around Melbourne, people might charge $1,800 for a crown. And I haven't kept up recently, but sort of ballpark, if you're a preferred provider, you might do it for 13 or 1400. So it's somewhat less. I have, yeah, those figures may be a bit inaccurate, that last one.
So, how many dentists are in Australia right now?
I think there's
About 20,000.
20,000. Yep, that'll be about it.
And how many would be in the UK? But
No idea on that. No, I don't have that figure.
I think it's
So,
12,000 GPs, 19,000 total, something like that. Where
right.
what do you think is a better economic advantage to practice in the United States, Australia, or the United Kingdom?
Well, I haven't practiced it in the States, so I can't say there.
But
But
you got a lot
definitely,
of friends. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, I like where I am. It's easy. You've got to, yeah. Depends on how you set your practice up, but it's not. I perceive the US as being a hyper competitive market.
Hmm.
That's how I perceive it, and you
It
see
is.
the
It is.
yeah.
It absolutely
So
is.
so whereas we're sort of competitive but not hyper competitive. So yeah,
I gotta
I
ask you
find that
some
an easier
I
market.
gotta ask you some Australian questions. I'm trying to guess
Yeah,
what all these dentists are thinking as they're commuting to
yeah,
work. Most of them are all commuting. So you're down there on the southern tip, Melbourne is, and
yes,
closest to Antarctica. Do you next island over is Tasmania? So
yes.
why was the big Bugs Bunny cartoon? Why was the crazy Tasmanian devil? Was there any tie from the Tasmanian devil to Tasmania?
Well, that's the only place it existed. I mean, it was the rest of the mainland. It's extinct. So yeah, that was the only place it existed. So that's why the tie there.
So
And
you
and
saw that
before the
cartoon Bugs Bunny and the
oh yeah,
Tasmanian
that was
devil?
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, very good cartoon.
So
And years ago they used to have another animal there called a Tasmanian tiger. So you can Google that one, Tasmanian tiger. But the farmers went down there and they thought it killed the sheep, so they wiped it out.
have you ever seen a Tasmanian devil?
Yeah, yeah.
What's it called?
The Tasmanian devil's one animal. Tasmanian tiger is a completely different animal. Tasmanian devil still exists.
Oh,
Tasmanian
it's
tiger
actually
is
called the
extinct.
Tasmanian devil,
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
and
Yeah.
it'd be a good household pet.
I don't think so. They look pretty vicious to me, and they've got really pointy teeth. So
Well, the reason I'm going back to this PPO is because, it's a trend that, like, say, when I got out of school, 95% of dentists took indemnity insurance. They submitted their fee, insurance paid a percent. Now it's 82% take these discounts, and most of them are discounting about 40%, which is the entire profit margin. Every
Mm,
dental consultant I know that'll go into a dental office can, if the dentist is taking 10 plans, they'll say, they lose money on half of them. And when they
yes.
quit taking those plans, their gross dollars goes down and their net goes up because they keep quit doing volume money. And it's one of those things where income peaked for U.S. dentists in 2005 at $219,000 a year, and now it's
Hmm.
down $45,000 to 174. And I
Right.
imagine the next decade's going to do it again. So I'm kind of wondering. I'm trying to think out loud where how how much money do the dentists have to lose? What does their income have to drop through before they realize I'm not interested in high end volume? I would rather have low end margin, especially since the United States, unlike Australia and England, the United States has 1 million attorneys who are just waiting to pounce on you. So that dentist that you were watching in London, in the United States, the lawyers would just they'd have a field day with him. So you
Yeah.
so you can't do low quality dentist like a low quality root canal when you're going to go to court and be judged by an endodontist. You can't do low quality work
Yeah.
when you're judged by the high quality specialists who are all charging at least 40% higher on every procedure general dentist does. And with PPOs, the specialists in the United States are nearly charging twice the amount. And so you're going to be graded by the lawyers to the guy that's getting paid a lot more money and going slow and doing it right with all the equipment and technology. So I always wonder what will
Yeah.
be the rock bottom for dentists before they finally realize, I don't think this is working for me.
Well, we haven't reached that state. Like 100, it shocks me that dentist incomes have fallen underneath, below $200,000, because that's sort of really. I mean, I don't think we've reached the. I mean, any dentist in Australia who's got a pretty good clue about what he can do, he'll be turning over 8 or 900,000 and keeping at least 40% of that. So that's what I say. It's not as competitive as a market. I mean, there's lots of dentists turning over less than that, but I mean, if you're starting to get a clue and starting to move on with your practice, that's what you'd be turning over. So,
And then I want to also ask you, how's corporate dentistry doing in Australia?
well, I'm not sure whether the model is going to be sustainable long term.
I'm
The
not sure of it
these
over here either. I'm not
Yeah.
sure of it at all.
Yeah, I mean, and I know a couple of companies, they keep growing their profit, but they're doing it by acquisition, not by smart
Exactly,
management of their
exactly.
existing
I
practices.
know
Yeah.
these people, they always say, oh, corporate's gone. Now they're like 20% of the market. Yeah. And every dollar in revenue they have a dollar of debt on their balance sheet. If they want to
Mm,
grow 1 million, they go borrow $1 million and buy $1 million practice. And so as their sales goes up, their debt tracks it. And I've already seen this pitch 30 years ago when there was
yeah.
Orthodontic Centers of America on New York Stock Exchange. They all imploded. If the model was sustainable, they would be generating so much profit dollars, they would be expanding de novo offices in cash flow. And you don't see any examples of that. You just see
No.
expansion in debt because they're offering liquidity to old selling doctors who want to sell their practice for a lot of money. And these kids coming out of school have $350,000 in debt. So all these corporates are doing is getting a huge line of credit from Wall Street, offering liquidity to all the sellers, and then hiring a bunch of young kids. I mean, I do not. I have yet to see any believable evidence that the thing will be here in 10 years. Yet they've got everyone convinced that in 10 years they'll have half the market.
Yeah, well, the thing with the corporates that was is sort of a bit scary is I don't think they've got a model for practice that works. I just literally, all they do is they buy an existing practice, like you said, $1 million, and then they try and lock up the practice principal for as long as they can because they don't know how to manage that practice. They don't have a believable model.
And then they
I
buy
mean,
your practice and my practice, and we're in our 50s, and then they
hmm,
replace us with some kid who's 25, and the product is the dentist.
Yes.
And it's going to take
Yeah.
them 25 years to pull 4 wisdom teeth in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and if they did know how to run practice, they would be setting up greenfield sites all over the place. Because why would you pay someone $1 million for goodwill if you knew how to set up a practice and get it running in 3 or 4 months?
And
I
the
mean,
and
you
the
just
and
wouldn't
the
do it.
other crazy thing about it is, they look at like Walgreens or McDonald's. In McDonald's, every hamburger is 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, cheese, lettuce, onion, and seed bun. It's a very standardized product. Walgreens prescriptions, I mean, it's 28 tabs of penicillin. Very
Yeah.
standard. But dentistry, if I showed a set of X-rays and study models to every dentist in Australia, how many different treatment plans would I get?
Oh, you'd get one for every dentist,
I
really. I mean,
know. So there's
yeah,
no
it's
standardized product. So the
no,
dentists that go in there and they see one tooth and they're 25 and they take an hour and a half, you're losing your shorts on that. But you get a dentist that sees the full mouth and can diagnose TMJ and the whole thing and all that stuff. Well, he's not going to work at McDentals.
yeah.
So
I
they'll
tell
take.
you,
So they'll
if
take.
there
Yeah. Go ahead.
If there was one thing, if I was running a corporate, there was one thing I would standardize. And I would say, if you want to work here, you must do this. And that would be do a thorough, comprehensive examination. And I'd specify what that is. I'd specify the x-rays you need to take, the tests you need to do. Because the thing is, I noticed watching these, and I watched quite a few corporate dentists work, the examination is all over the shop. It varies from some who are doing a nice, thorough examination all the way down to somebody who just grabs a mirror and a probe and looks around and goes, yeah, that looks pretty good, and then sends the patient back out the door. And I would really standardize the examination, because the thing with that is the guy who just looks around and goes, yeah, it looks all fine, see you later, they're going to create a liability issue for the corporate, when they miss perio, when they miss non-vital teeth, when they miss caries, all those sorts of things. So I would standardize the examination, make the dentist do an exam.
But you can't, because go to Dental Town. You can't get 2 dentists to agree that today's Saturday, and it's really not, because it's Saturday 5:34 p.m. here, and it's Sunday morning at 9:30 there. But I mean, like
Yeah,
they'll show an old amalgam. And
yeah,
there's some little gray around it and cracks. And in my office, I would watch that. And some of these I started watching in '87, and I'm still watching them 30 years later. And then the townie will jump on there and say, "Oh my God, that's all decayed. You need to take it out and put a composite in there." Then someone else is like, "Well, look at all those cracks. You got to stick that tooth in a pencil sharpener and put a crown on there." And it's like, really, to save the
yeah.
tooth, you got to drill off all the tooth structure to save the tooth. I mean, why don't we just burn down the city to prevent fires? So you can't get them to agree on anything. I mean, amalgams last twice as long as composites. Yet every dentist in America, I'd say at least half the dentists believe that composites last longer, because they don't want to look at the research, because their composites were better. They want to replace
Mm.
their silver spoon with a plastic spoon and tell you how it lasts twice as long. So yeah, I don't know how corporate can do it. I think all they're doing is offering liquidity to people who are selling, and then
Yeah.
providing jobs to the people coming out of school, and how long they can sustain that. But I'll tell you what, if it was profitable and if it was sustainable, they would be publicly traded. Everybody at the
Oh,
NASDAQ, everybody at the, what's your market called? The FTSE?
uh, oh. Our index is called the All Ordinaries. Yeah.
The All Ordinaries?
All Ordinaries.
Yeah,
Yeah. Ordinary
they would be,
shares.
they'd be
Yeah.
on the All Ordinaries. They'd be looking at the
Yeah. Yeah.
cash,
Yeah.
the balance sheet. But hey, that was the fastest hour of my life. That was amazing. If you ever want to create an online CE course for Dental Town, that would be amazing. I mean, they need it. So how do people contact you? Go to the
Well,
relaxeddentist.com.
that's the best way. And yeah, we didn't even get to the explain step. Oh man.
Oh, we'll go if
Have
if
to
you want to go. Go. You want to go?
Oh, well, is there a limit, or
No,
I don't
heck
know?
no. It's Saturday
Won't take
night,
long.
5:30. I got all the time in the world.
All right. Yeah, the relaxeddentist.com is the best way to get in touch with me. And I've said it as a lifetime. I'd love to come to the States and talk sometime. So we can cross on the planes on the way back and forward.
Well, I'll
So
tell you the best way if you want to speak more. The best way every there's about 278 dental societies in the United States. They're all volunteers. They're all nonprofits. They'll go to a
Yep.
committee and they'll say, okay, we need some volunteers to pick the speakers for the next meeting. And some crazy guy raises their hand and regrets it before his hand gets over his head. And they say, pick me a course on endo, something for the whole staff like practice management, and something on implants. And
Yep.
don't get the speakers we had the last 3 years. Find someone new. So what they do, those 400 courses on Dental Town, they're all about an hour long. So they'll go to like the endo section and they'll watch like 6 speakers on endos and say, I really like that guy. I had a guy put up an endo course and booked 76 invitationals. And then I would say, if you want to be an actor,
Yeah.
you need a demo tape to send to Hollywood or whatever. I think the number one demo tape in dentistry to speak more is an online CE course for an hour. That's your marketing. That's your brand.
Yeah.
And if some guy's watching that and say, oh my God, I want him to come speak in Alabama or Tennessee or Idaho or Montana, there's 50 states. So do that. Build an online CE course. That'll be your demo tape. I guarantee you that'll get you invitationals.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very good advice. Yeah. Thanks, Howard.
All right, and next time you're about it's about an hour and a half flight from Melbourne to Sydney.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, yeah. So we're south. So yeah, it's worth coming down
It's
to
about
Melbourne.
an 8-hour drive.
Yes. Yeah. Oh no, a bit more than 8 hours. I'd say it'd be about 10 hours. So
I
yeah.
drove it with Jeffrey Knight
Oh, did you?
because
okay.
I wanted to climb the tallest mountain. I climbed the tallest one in Africa, Kilimanjaro, and then when I was in Australia, I said let's climb the tallest one there. It's Mount Kosciuszko.
Kosciuszko.
Kosciuszko,
Yep,
named after a Polish explorer. And gosh, that was so beautiful. I hate flying from city to city because all you see is clouds. And Jeff said, it's a long drive. And I'm like, well, that's what you want to do when you're in another country. You want a long drive and see the country. God, I love Australia. And so next time I'm down, you know what my favorite city in Australia is, though?
Which one?
It's Perth.
Ah, Perth.
Okay.
Okay.
Los Angeles to Sydney is a 15-hour flight. And
Yes.
then, so you're really down under. You're far away. But
Yes.
Perth is the farthest away from Sydney, clear on the other side. And it is really like a different time and place and dimension than anything I've ever seen. I mean, it is really like what is it, a 2-hour flight to Antarctica from there?
Could be. I mean, it's meant to be the most isolated big city in the world.
Yeah,
It's
and
about
you can
million
tell,
odd people.
it's really isolated. There's just so many differences in everything from bathrooms to windows to doors. I just love it. It is so cool.
And you can drive an hour from Perth and you can be on an absolutely beautiful, pristine beach and have it all to yourself. It's incredible.
It is so cool. I can move to Perth tomorrow. All right, Mark, thank you so much for all that you do for dentistry. Thank you so much for being on my show. And if you want to do an online C course, I'm Howard at dentaltown.com, but you email HOGO for Howard Goldstein, HOGO at dentaltown.com.
HOGO.
Okay, buddy. Have a rockin' hot Sunday.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks for having
time
me.
for
all
me.
the best to everyone.
It's time for me to have a beer, and you have to wait another 12 hours.
That's right.
Okay, bye-bye.